Welcome. I'm Bob Rubin, and on behalf of my colleagues at the Hamilton Project, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's discussion, which, as you know, is entitled Financing 21st Century Infrastructure in the United States. Let me just say a few words about the Hamilton Project before we turn to the program. We started about 9 years ago now, and it was a small group of academics, policy experts, business people with a strong interest in policy, and we are not an institution. We formed together as a partnership, organized as an advisory council, and ever since what we've done is to focus on policy issues and hold events of the kind that we're holding today. Our objectives, at least our belief is the objectives of economic policy should be growth, widespread participation in the benefits of growth, and economic security. Moreover, we believe that these objectives can be mutually reinforcing, not antithetical, as some argue. For example, widespread income gains promote growth by increasing demand, providing greater resources for workers to have access to education, to health care, to so much else that improves productivity, and also by increasing public support for growth-oriented economic policies. We support market-based economics, but we believe strongly in the role of government to do that which markets by their very nature will not do. Somebody asked me the other day, what is the ideological orientation of the Hamilton Project? And the answer is, in an increasingly polarized Washington, we are a voice for practical, evidence-based, and analysis-based policy. Now, let me make a few observations about today's program, and perhaps some of those will be discussed during the panels. There is widespread policy agreement, as all of you know, amongst elected officials in Washington that we need to increase and improve infrastructure investment, particularly with respect to transportation. And the Hamilton Project has been engaged in this for quite some time. In 2008, we convened a wide-ranging discussion of infrastructure investment. Last spring, we hosted a forum on wireless spectrum and technology infrastructure. More recently, this past October, in conjunction with Stanford University and keynoted by Jerry Brown, Governor of California, we had a one-day forum in Palo Alto on water infrastructure, and obviously highly relevant in many parts of the country, very much including California. Investing in infrastructure creates jobs now, which is critically important, and is central to productivity gains, to private investment, and economic success over the longer run. Having said that, historically, we have done what we needed to do. From the transcontinental rail system in the 19th century, massive New Deal public works projects, President Eisenhower's sponsorship of the interstate highway system, and much else. But now, for far too long, we failed to invest anything close to sufficient levels for improving our transportation system, roads, bridges, mass transit, and so much else. And we compound that by underinvesting in the maintenance of our existing infrastructure. The result is we fall critically behind in terms of new infrastructure, and we allow our existing infrastructure to deteriorate. The authors of today's featured paper refer, I think aptly to, and I quote, de facto policy of inaction. And that policy of inaction is out of step with what are bold steps being taken elsewhere in the world. China is intensely focused on investing in tomorrow's infrastructure. And in Europe, just last year, the European Union launched a massive initiative aimed at attracting private capital to finance infrastructure projects across the continent. The threshold issue with respect to investment in the United States, as all of you know, is how do we finance infrastructure investment? Some argue that with interest rates so low, we should undertake large-scale deficit funding in order to meet our infrastructure needs, and that might work. On the other hand, others argue that there are serious issues and risks associated with deficit financing of major projects. A different approach would be to have upfront infrastructure investment combined with longer-term pay-fors that involve structural reform to put our entitlements on a sound financial footing for the long term and increase revenues. So, the question of financing infrastructure very much melds with the larger questions about the nation's fiscal policy. Mr. Secretary, we are honored to have you with us. A second big question is how to more effectively attract private or non-federal capital, whether domestic or foreign, to major infrastructure projects. I've talked to both foreign and domestic potential investors, and what you find is that they, once studying the subject, quickly become deterred by our cumbersome and time-consuming approval processes. And in the case of China, by concerns about political opposition. What we need to do is to streamline these measures and create a more welcoming political environment for private sector and foreign investment. That could create jobs now and improve our competitiveness for the long term. Two sources of such capital that come to mind are, number one, the vast capital resources that American companies are holding abroad, if that were combined in some form with the repatriation arrangement for the purposes of then investing in infrastructure. And another, as I mentioned a moment ago, Chinese entities have vast quantities of capital. They are desirous of investing in the United States, but they are deterred by the political and regulatory obstacles. I think mayors and governors could play a very major role here by working with potential investors to help guide them through these political and regulatory hurdles. The third issue is whether and to what extent we should privatize infrastructure. Privatization could provide proceeds for investing in improvements to existing infrastructure and financing for new projects. There are a lot of issues, however, with respect to privatization. Privatizing existing infrastructure, as well as attracting private capital, requires revenue streams, and there are a lot of issues around revenue streams. Some of them are technological. One issue to be mindful of is distributional consequences and effects. A final question I'll raise with respect to today's discussion is how we can more efficiently allocate the capital that we do invest in infrastructure in order to increase economic impact and to get a better return on our investment. A friend of mine who used to teach at a Northeastern University told me about a study that had been done that showed that the federal investment in infrastructure, in fact, has a much lower return on capital than would be the case if the capital were allocated economically as opposed to politically. And the answer to that is we have to find some way of reducing the role of politics in the allocation of capital. Let me conclude by saying that I believe and have long believed the United States has enormous long-term strengths. We should succeed in the long run economically. I would rather do business in the United States than any other country in the world. But if we're going to realize that potential, we have enormously important policy challenges that we must meet. And one of those is certainly the need for adequate and modern infrastructure, and that, of course, is the topic of today's session. We are joined today, and delighted to be joined today, by highly experienced, thoughtful, and distinguished panelists, and they will contribute their views to the subject of infrastructure and the various issues that will be raised at the panels. We are grateful to them for being with us. In accordance with the practice of the Hamilton Project, I will not read to you from the resumes, but as you can see by looking at those resumes, this is a truly highly distinguished group of participants. Our first roundtable will be a broad-ranging discussion of the issues relating to infrastructure. The discussants are Secretary Anthony Foxx, the U.S. Department of Transportation, who we are deeply honored to have with us, Roger Altman, founder and chairman of the investment banking firm Evercore, and a member of the Advisory Council of the Hamilton Project, Ed Rendell, 45th governor of the state of Pennsylvania, who, as many of you know, has had a lot of experience with infrastructure, and Rosa DeLauro, congressman from Massachusetts, congressman from Connecticut. Close by. That's the same general, right. Congresswoman from New England, with whom I had the pleasure of working for a long time, and if everybody in Congress were like Rosa, we would have a government. The discussion will be moderated by Al Hunt, distinguished columnist for Bloomberg View. And if everybody were like Al in the media, we would have a media. After a short break, our second panel will focus on the featured paper, which presents thoughtful and practical policy proposals. And I would very strongly encourage all of you to read this paper. As Roger said, this is a paper with a host of proposals that are real, that are serious, and that cost the federal government very, very little, if for that matter anything. The discussants are Alan Kruger, professor of economics at Princeton University and former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Aaron Klein, director of financial regulatory reform at the Bipartisan Policy Center, John Delaney, congressman who represents the Maryland's 6th District, and Tyler Duvall, principal at McKinsey & Company and former assistant secretary for transportation policy at the U.S. Department of Transportation. The moderator will be Melissa Carney, director of the Hamilton Project and professor of economics at the University of Maryland. Let me close by thanking 4 people who developed the intellectual construct for this program and brought it all together. Melissa, who I've already mentioned, Hamilton Project's outstanding managing director, Kristen McIntosh, Brad Hirschbein, who has been the acting policy director of the Hamilton Project, and Greg Nance, who's one of our 3 terrific research assistants. Let me also thank all of the members of the staff of the Hamilton Project, without whom none of what we do would get done. And with that, I will turn the panel over to Roger, I think. Al. Okay, not Roger, Al.
While Ed's getting mic'd up, let me start. Everybody here in the back of the room? Good. I am Al Hunt. I'm the least busy and important person here, but I'm the one that has a conflict, so I'm going to leave a little bit early, and Roger Altman will take my place. That single act will increase the average knowledge, brain power, and not to mention net worth of this panel, so we always can be appreciative. Everybody's been introduced, and I think let's start with you, Mr. Secretary. In 2.5 weeks, the Highway Trust Fund expires. What's going to happen?
I'll just start talking. There you go. If Congress doesn't act, we're going to find ourselves actually not being able to spend money. The department's authorization expires. It's not just the funding that's at issue, it's actually the authority to spend money. And so this is a very serious issue. I expect that we will likely see more punting.
Short term.
For uncertain duration. There's conversation, active conversation about trying to get something through the end of the year. Congress could pass an extension into July without adding more money to the trust fund because there are sufficient revenues there. But my concern is that if they go through the brain damage, if you will, to find additional money to get through December, they could actually take the extra step to try to get us through 6 years, because it's going to require some gymnastics to get there either way.
And the distinguished Congresswoman from Connecticut, from your perspective, what do you think is going to happen?
I concur with the Secretary. I mean, it's really 8 legislative days. It's not 2.5 weeks. It's 8 legislative days. The majority's new budget, the Republican majority's new budget, has talked about a 20% cut, about 22% cut in transportation funds. There isn't going to be a long-term fix, the 5 or 6 years that we've been able to, in the past, pull together on a bipartisan basis. That isn't going to happen. So you've got a short-term measure. This will be the 33rd short-term extension over the last 6 years. So you've got projects delayed all over the country, the uncertainty of it all, and there'll probably be a transfer from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund. And the last one was $10 billion. The Secretary, again, is right. It is the reauthorization. The authorization is up. There's still fund balances, so that may carry us to July or August. And I suspect that is what is going to happen.
Ed Rendell, you've lived with this for all your time as governor, mayor. If that happens, if that just short-term kick the can down the road once again, what are the implications?
Well, the implications are that nothing serious can get done. States and local governments will use it for fix it first, but any planning, any new projects, any major significant changes in the way we do infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, are on the back burner and just aren't going to get done. And that's a real tragedy. You know, eventually we're going to have to deal with this issue. The repatriation idea, which the president has put forward, and his idea is a good idea. Congressman Delaney has been one of the bright thinkers on this. Even though it would give us money for the next program, it doesn't solve anything because repatriation is a one-shot. It's a one-time fix. And at the end of that year, whatever it's 4 or 5 or 6 years, we're back at square one. If we're going to be serious about having a first-class infrastructure that can compete with the rest of the world, we're going to have to find some significant long-term funding. And everybody knows that. Everybody's scared. Nobody wants to raise their hand and put up a tax vote. If we don't do it, this country is going to hell in a handbasket.
We'll get to repatriation and other ways to pay for it in a second. Roger, what are the economic implications of not dealing with this in a long-term sense?
Oh, it's evident, and there's been a great deal of work done in academia, in government, and elsewhere on this, that our infrastructure is, in many respects, a burden on American competitiveness, and actually having the effect of reducing standards of living in this country. There's a reference in the paper to the amount that our poor infrastructure actually costs each driver, each person that drives a vehicle, whether it's a commercial vehicle or a van or a car, in terms of repair and so forth. So it's a negative ultimately for standards of living in this country. Parenthetically, the drying up of funds in the Highway Trust Fund and the difficulty of reauthorizing it also illustrates that the main financing source for the Highway Trust Fund, the gas tax, is in need of reform also. Because we're passing, for example, through a period, we'll see how long it lasts, of quite relatively low gasoline prices. And under the proposal that's put forth here, that would be an opportunity to take more from the tax portion of the gasoline price, and then when gasoline prices are high, you could go the other way and take less from the tax portion of the gasoline price. So the gasoline tax, which we all know hasn't been changed since 1993, is in need of reform. Not necessarily raising it, just reforming it.
Well, Rosa, would you vote to raise the gas tax now?
Look, I think that's, I knew you were going to ask me that question. How could I have predicted that?
Incredible insight, Rosa.
Oh, my God, yes. But look, first of all, let me just say this. We have a short-term issue and a longer-term issue. If we can find a way that you can get to some stability in the short term, that ought to be investigated and reforming, as Roger pointed out. But I'm of the view that with regard to infrastructure, and I'm not for repatriation, I'll be very clear about that at the outset, that it's about the long term and where we are going with infrastructure. If you look at the way we fund infrastructure, we've got the Transportation Department, we've got the Highway Trust Fund, we've got TIFIA, we've got the Build America bonds, and we need to reauthorize those. We've got municipal bonds. Then you go to energy, and we finance, and the transportation is general fund and user fees. You go to energy, we fund it through the general fund, whether it's the grid or whether it is efficiency. Take water, EPA, State Revolving Loan Fund, for both drinking water and wastewater. The Commerce and Agriculture Department deal with telecommunications, which has never been a hefty amount of money. You think about this process, it's siloed, It doesn't have, it is in the realm of politics. If you're going to try to deal under, these are agencies that are competing with one another. It's piecemeal in the approach. And what you can't do, you've got departments, excuse me, Mr. Secretary, but I would just say to you that I don't believe that infrastructure should all be housed under transportation. You've got some of it that is there, but then you've got competing agencies. The Infrastructure Bank, which I introduced in 1994, and I'm looking at Secretary Rubin, because at that time, Mr. Secretary, we had the unions, we had the U.S. Chamber supporting of the effort, but I think it was you, Mr. Secretary, who told me that we would add to the deficit if we went down this road.
That was before the Hamilton project.
Right, it is.
Rosa, if we start revisiting Bob Rubin's sins, we'll be here for a long time.
But my
but I
point
gather-
is that the infrastructure bank is a new paradigm.
But I gather you would not vote for a tax increase in the gasoline tax.
Good Lord.
I want to get to Ed Rendell. That would seem to most people from the outside, that's the logical way to do this.
Of course it is. Anybody remember what a dozen eggs cost in '94? 87 cents. They cost $2 today. A stamp, 29 cents. It costs 49 cents today. A car, average car purchase price, $12,000. It's $31,000 today. Nothing hasn't gone up, and gone up substantially, 2 or 2.5, and in some cases almost 3 times. Raise the gas tax. States do it. Red states do it. Wyoming did it with a Republican legislature and a Republican governor. Virginia, when Governor McDonnell was there, Republican governor, Republican legislature. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. Pennsylvania with a Republican governor, Mike's successor, and a Republican legislature raised the gas tax over 5 years, 28 cents a gallon. 28 cents a gallon. I stood with the governor supporting it. Not one member of the legislature who voted yes was defeated in the fall 2014 election. Not one member.
Mr. Secretary, we'll give you a chance to defend the repatriation provision, since there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of other defenders of it. Is it dead right now?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to defend repatriation because repatriation actually doesn't score well. But I will defend our approach, which is a business tax reform approach, which deals comprehensively with this issue. What we would do is basically take $1 to $2 trillion that are untaxed overseas corporate earnings, apply a 14% tax rate for existing profits, and that would generate the $238 billion we need to pay for the $478 billion bill we have, coupled with existing revenues from the gas tax. There are other provisions of our proposal that deal with forward-going profits, but the bottom line is you need a comprehensive solution there, and there are Republicans that want to work with us on this. And I think we have a good dialogue going, but we, of course, have some other fish to fry with trade right now on the same committees, and so we want to get that cleared up and passed and move through, and then we can deal with the transportation issues.
You're frowning, Rosa.
No, I'm not frowning at all. I just chuckled when he talked about the trade issue, that's all. But it is, there's the short-term issue, there's a longer-term issue. And as I said at the outset of my comments, Al, that I'm for getting us to some place where we can get stabilized. We have an immediate problem with the Highway Trust Fund. Let's just figure that out. Frankly, you cannot pass a gas tax. There isn't going to be anyone that's going to vote for an increase in the gas tax.
Why do state legislators vote
Well,
for
I'm not talking about the state governor. I'm talking about a reality in the U.S.
But you may well be right, but Ronald Reagan was the great champion of user taxes and gas taxes. So I mean, is the Gipper so far left now that?
But why are we not looking? It's a mechanism. Why aren't we looking at other mechanisms to deal with long-term infrastructure, like an infrastructure bank, capitalize it at the $25 billion that we talked about at the outset, $5 billion over 5 years, and attract those private investors that the Secretary was talking about.
Let me just jump in here and just sort of level set, because I think there's an issue here about just what target are we shooting at. The Highway Trust Fund is, a figment of the 1956 interstate highway system. And fixing the Highway Trust Fund is not tantamount to fixing our infrastructure.
Yes.
There is a problem that when people in this town think that, you get it stabilized and that's going to solve our problems, it's not. CBO estimates that we're going to be $11 to $12 billion short just maintaining our system if we just keep level funding in the Highway Trust Fund. So we need a big bump in what we're doing. And I think the governor is exactly right that the confidence and the courage that state and local leaders need to be able to do big, bold projects that are game-changing and that get people out of the mentality that they're just spending money on the same old commute that they have and actually speeding up travel times and things. That kind of investment is going to require a different caliber of investment at the federal level, period. And so the Grow America Act that we've introduced is one way to get there. We've said we're open to ideas that come out of Congress. But if it's just fixing the Highway Trust Fund, I can tell you, the qualifications for your secretaries of transportation aren't going to be political experience. It's going to be David Copperfield. You're going to need a magician to do what we need for this country going forward.
Roger, everybody in politics is for doing something about infrastructure. I mean, I haven't asked Senator Paul, but I would suspect even he would say, yes, let's do something about it. But then the question becomes, what do you do, obviously, and how you pay for it? I think everyone's addressed some of this so far. I don't want to steal thunder from the second panel today, but elaborate a little bit about some of the things that you proposed in that paper that came out today or the other day.
Well, first of all, Secretary Foxx is right, just to be clear, because much of our infrastructure deficit, if I can put it that way, goes beyond highways. We have big problems with our ports in terms of modernization, airports, and other aspects of infrastructure that go beyond the Highway Trust Fund, however well it's funded or not funded. So he's absolutely correct about that. I also don't want to steal the thunder from the second panel. So this paper proposes a series of initiatives, several short-term ones, and then certain long-term ones. But essentially, there are ways to make a big dent in this infrastructure deficit, to make a lot of progress, which wouldn't cost the taxpayer anything. TIFIA was mentioned. That's part of our recommendations. The Department of Transportation oversees it. It's the Transportation Infrastructure Financing Authority, essentially. It's a loan program. It's historically not had any losses to speak of ever. The paper proposes to expand that substantially. It does require that the state and local entities that submit proposals to TIFIA have a dedicated revenue source, so it's not for every single project out there. You do have to have a revenue source, like a toll or like some other user fee. But nevertheless, there are lots of ways to break this logjam and to begin to move up in terms of the national infrastructure, which wouldn't cost the taxpayer anything because they'd be self-financing.
Ed Rendell, when it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, it usually doesn't do much.
No, I think the paper that Roger's talking about has some very creative ideas which will make incremental progress, and all of them should be passed into law. I would quarrel with Roger over the terminology of a big dent. They don't make a big dent. And understand, Rosa talks about getting private dollars involved in infrastructure. It's a great idea. Less than 10% of our infrastructure projects, whether it's transportation, water and sewer, ports, less than 10% could be financed with private dollars, because private dollars need a return of investment. Pennsylvania has 4,500 structurally deficient bridges. When I took over as governor, we had 6,600. That's great progress. But on the other 4,500, less than 10 of them could be told to give a rate of return. So let's be serious. We can do all the things that are in the Hamilton Project paper. We can do an infrastructure bank, which I have fought for, but that's incremental progress. For us ever to be a competitive nation again, and by the way, the World Economic Forum, which rated our infrastructure number 1 11 years ago, ranked it 16th in competitiveness this year. If we're ever going to be back as the leading infrastructure in the world, we have to make a major financial commitment, and it has to hurt a little bit.
Rosa, let's turn.
No free lunch.
I want to turn to you on the infrastructure bank. And Roger, do you want to join in on what Ed
The only
said?
comment I would make, I'm happy to concede the point, is a difference between a big dent and some dent. And one of the spirits, so to speak, behind this paper was the following. Both sides agree on the urgency of an infrastructure initiative, which is not all that common in this town. But they don't agree on how to pay for it and how to, quote, govern it, unquote, in terms of how the projects are selected and regional differences and state and local differences and so forth. So the spirit of this paper is let's start doing something, even if we're not going to solve it all in one fell swoop. So Governor Rendell is right. Of course we need more than this. This is just a way to make a start at a moment when there's deadlock otherwise. And he's certainly right. There is no free lunch. A lot of the proposals here might not cost the taxpayer anything, but if you're talking about user fees, they're going to cost the users, just like you pay a toll crossing a bridge or pay indirectly a user fee on your airline ticket in terms of airline landing fees and so forth, which are passed on to consumers. So he's right.
Rosa, talk a little bit about your long-held belief in a national infrastructure bank. How would it be modeled? Is it Federal Reserve? Is it?
No, it's modeled on the European Investment Bank and been in process for a long time and being thought through. I just would make the reference back to our infrastructure today is really dealt with on a very piecemeal basis, as I've mentioned. I think that, and it is also very subject to authorizations and appropriations. And if we have to depend on authorizations or reauthorizations and appropriations, we know what kind of a quagmire that gets into. And there's also the politics of it, that you are then into political ideology, a whole variety of things. So the bank, as I say, is modeled after the European Investment Bank. It is capitalized by U.S. government of $5 billion a year over 5 years, $25 billion. It then is under the Department of Treasury. So you go out on the capital markets and you can borrow. You've got pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, institutional funding, if you will, coming in. You've got it issues bonds, and there is a structure, and the structure is directors, which are selected by the President and the Senate. It's an executive committee, which deals with the day-to-day operation and makes the decision on projects based on a set of criteria, not someone picking up the phone and say, I need some help in Montana, I need some help in New Haven, Connecticut, I need some help here, there, or everywhere, but on a set of criteria for that effort. It also is 50% financing. You want to attract other sources of financing there, so it's not just the bank, and also what the Secretary could do is what the Build America Bonds does now, is it to help to pay the interest up to 40%. Project is selected. It's meant for states can coalesce to do this. It's national projects which we can go after. It's not just state and local issues, but it includes that. It's never meant to supplant what TIFIA does, what the Build America bonds would do, et cetera, municipal bonds. It is another tool to be able to move us to projects that should have national significance and regional significance overall.
Rosa, whatever the merits, and they seem considerable, something that is based on a European model and is capitalized by the federal government, can you get any Republican?
Well, for instance, we've had 103 Democrats on it and no Republicans, but I believe that we can do this. If we're serious about trying to address, let me step back for a second. You know the history. You all know the history. We had the Hoover Dam, the Erie Canal. We've done rural electrification. We built a transcontinental railroad. We have a national highway system. I mean, where are the big thoughts today? You may be right, but that's small bore to think that we cannot think that big again. And we're talking specifically about jobs. This is about jobs that can't go elsewhere. We are talking about, yes, rebuilding our infrastructure. We've got an Asian Development Bank It's an Asian infrastructure investment bank, which has just started up, in which China is willing to put up $50 billion in a $100 billion capitalized program. Instead of the United States trying to keep countries out of that development bank, we ought to be looking at how we create our own bank and be able to fund these kinds of projects and access all that money that is overseas and bring it here.
Mr. Secretary, weigh in on this, because you've been talking to members of Congress a great deal in the last couple months and have a...
What's needed, I think, is an all-of-the-above approach. It is an approach that takes from all of the various ideas that are out there. We have in our budget, for example, and I think for many years have had an infrastructure bank as part of the president's proposal. And so I think that's something that should be part of the mix of things we do. We should also, as Secretary Rubin pointed out earlier, we should focus on streamlining. There's ways that we can actually get projects done a lot faster and also not jeopardize the environment at the same time. And we ought to be doing that because it saves money and creates more capacity for the dollar. We also, I think, need a substantial rewrite in our transportation policy because it is really a 20th century policy. The 21st century is very different. We have mega regions that are organizing our economy in different ways than we thought before. We need to recognize that from a transportation standpoint and to be able to make decisions based on how the economy works, not just by old political jurisdictions. And these are types of things that I think our system needs. But unfortunately, here in Washington, the talk is, can we get the Highway Trust Fund fixed? And people use that as almost a reference point for fixing our infrastructure, and it's just not the case.
Is there any bipartisan receptivity to what you're talking about? Because that's the only way it's going to get done.
I think there is. I mean, I think there's
Can you give us a
energy.
couple names?
Tell
Corker. Bob Corker. The only Republican who signed on to a tax increase in the gas tax. Bob Corker in the Senate. Good man.
Chris Murphy, too. He's a good man.
I'm going to.
Chris Murphy?
He's a Democrat.
Yeah, I'm not going to name names. But what I will say.
I think you would.
But what I will say is I think, on issues like creating, for example, a national freight plan that's funded, there should be bipartisan support, and I think there is bipartisan support for that. This question of an infrastructure bank, Congressman Delaney, is a different type of approach than Congresswoman DeLauro, but he's got a bunch of Republicans and a bunch of Democrats who've signed on to the package. You'll hear that later. So I think that there is bipartisan interest in going forward, but we have got to get this country off the dime. And the last thing I'll say about this is I don't think the urgency is well understood. It isn't just the crumbling bridges and things today. We're going to have 70 million more people in this country, and those people are going to be trying to use the same roads, the same rails, the same highways, same everything that we're trying to use. Travel times are going to get longer. Quality of life is going to suffer. So if you've got kids and grandkids and you want to give them a better future than you had, this is an issue that you ought to care about.
Well, Roger, it also is an issue you ought to care about if you are concerned with our global situation, our global competitiveness. That doesn't resonate with people, though, does it? How do you make that resonate?
Well, I think you have to ask a communications expert or a political expert the real answer to that. But most people seem to identify with local factors and local infrastructure problems. And if you say to people, in my own experience, you're aware that the quality of the roads and bridges and airports and ports isn't what it used to be in terms of competitiveness, most people say yes to that, I think. That's why the problem really surrounds how to pay for it and how to govern it. I think most Americans think, yes, we need to upgrade our infrastructure. They may not think of it that in the context, as you said, of global competitiveness, but they think of it in terms of their everyday experience. Everybody can see, deteriorating roads and deteriorating bridges, and I don't think it's much of a debate about whether they exist or whether they need to be fixed. I think it's about, as I said, how to pay for it and how to decide which projects get advanced. And the Secretary is right that it needs to be a multifaceted approach, and the Highway Trust Fund is just one part of it.
Ed Rendell, you're oh, I'm sorry, Rosa.
I was just going to say, you take a look at what happened with the sustainable growth rate, with the SGR. For years, we kicked that can down the road. We had long-term, it didn't work. short-term fixes for it. This is, in the healthcare area. All of a sudden, in the last several months, the decision was made, the political will issue, to say we need to come together. We need to figure out how to make this work long-term, do something that's permanent. And it's not fully paid for. It's not fully paid for. So you had Democrats and Republicans, John Boehner, Nancy Pelosi, coming together to say, this is where we're going on this. And you know what, friends? It isn't all paid for. Now, you can have the deficit folks who are building up a head of steam there, but it passed. It moved forward. So it is getting to that political will where there is the crisis that the Secretary talks about, and the governor, and how you use those multiple pieces to move forward. It isn't just the one piece, and it isn't just the Highway Trust Fund that's going to get us where we need to go.
Ed Rendell, if it's a matter of political will, which almost everyone agrees that it is, and if everybody is for doing something major in infrastructure, then it would seem a natural thing, as your colleague Marcia Hale said earlier, to make it a political issue in 2016. The problem, however, it seems to me, is everybody will say, yes, I'm for doing something big on infrastructure, and drop it there. So what could you do? What could you do to put it more on the political agenda in the national election next year?
Well, you could ask all the converts, okay, you're for improving our infrastructure. Now you've got 2 minutes to tell us how you would fund it. Call them on it. Call them on it. It's so easy. I tested, Congressman Schuster is from Pennsylvania. When he became the chair of the House Transportation Committee, he had a hearing which Terry O'Sullivan from the Laborers, Mr. Donahue from the Chamber, and I were the 3 witnesses. There were 60 members of the Transportation Committee present. Every one of them spoke after we testified and pledged their fealty towards improving the infrastructure. People got up and said, I'm a Tea Party member, but I think infrastructure spending is crucial to the long-term future of the country. Not one of them had any idea how to pay for it. We can't let the politicians get away with just giving us pablum. We have to make hard choices. The country was built by people who made hard choices. The country was built by people who made risks. The Erie Canal wasn't popular. Everyone said it would cost too much, it wouldn't work. Jefferson signed it. Abe Lincoln, in the middle of the Civil War, understood that we needed a transcontinental rail system. Dwight Eisenhower, Republican, understood that if this country was really going to grow, we needed a transcontinental highway system. And tough choices. My favorite JFK quote is, we do these things not because they're easy, we do them because they're hard. If we don't get back to doing hard things, if we don't get back to taking risks, we have no shot. And again, I would submit to anybody on the panel or anybody in the audience, why can state legislators put up their hand and vote for a 28-cent increase in the gas tax when the Corker-Murphy bill is a 10-cent increase adjusted for the construction inflation index? What's so hard? Nobody knows what the gas tax is. Intelligent audience, answer this question correctly for me, and I will give you 2 tickets to the next Philadelphia 76ers championship basketball.
Only people under age 22 are. It's going to take that long. But
what's the federal? If you know it, raise your hand. What's the federal gas tax per gallon now? Raise your hand if you know it. About 5% of a very intelligent audience. You could raise the federal gas tax 10 cents and nobody would have a clue, because they go to the pump 2 weeks later and the Arabs decide to lower prices to kill natural gas. Boom, nobody ever sees it. It's an easy vote. It's not a hard vote. Good God.
But that didn't. The Highway Trust Fund is not going to build the Hoover Dam, the Erie Canal,
I understand,
our
and
road
I'm for doing
system.
all that other stuff.
So, I
Rosa,
understand.
We're not going to
but-
have a first-class transportation system without major investments.
Absolutely.
And all of the things the great things that Roger's talking about are good steps, but they're not major investments.
Mr. Secretary, you have traveled around the country a lot talking about this issue. Tell us what has struck you, but also Do you get a sense that the people you've talked to, whether it's local officials or voters, are willing to do the hard thing?
You see in various states that states are stepping up and finding ways to raise revenue, and they're doing it in some creative ways. Some states have taxed oil on the barrel upstream as opposed to at the pump. And these states have resources that they're now plowing into their infrastructure. On the other hand, you also have a group of states now that are pulling projects back because of the federal funding uncertainty. We have 6 that have pulled back about $2 billion of projects. There are probably more. And again, as we've said all along, the other problem we have is that the planning work to actually start a project, which can in some cases take months and years, that planning work is slowing down. So even if we had a pile of cash put on top of our system today, there would still be a lag time before projects would start moving because of this confidence problem we have in the country. So we need to get at it.
A lot of this is funded at the state and local level, Ed. Are mayors and governors doing more now, or are they incapacitated because of the federal?
Much more now. Red states, blue states, everyone is raising their own revenue. And they're doing it, as the Secretary said, in some creative ways. In Virginia, they dedicated a portion of the increase in sales tax and dedicated a portion of it to transportation funding. In a lot of states, in Wyoming, as red as can be, 16-cent increase in the gas tax, 16 cents a gallon. I mean, this is an issue that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, 2 groups that probably couldn't agree today is Monday, both agree that the gas tax should be raised. What are we waiting for? What more do they need? What more do our congressmen and our senators need?
Roger, does technology make a difference as you project out in the next 10, 20 years, both the needs and the abilities to?
Yeah, enormously. So, for example,
Elaborate a little bit.
If you think about the Highway Trust Fund and think forward 10, 15, 20 years, it's almost certain we're going to have autonomous driving vehicles in this country, driverless cars, driverless vehicles. And many of them are going to be electric. In fact, you could imagine a scenario where you have driverless electric vehicles that dominate in terms of at least newer vehicles that are on the road. Well, they're not going to be paying, for obvious reasons, gasoline taxes. And so the role of the gas tax, even if it isn't reformed, is going to decline. And by the way, that's occurring every day, fortunately, because the fuel economy standards have risen, and vehicle manufacturers are responding to that. Average fuel efficiency is improving, let alone electric vehicles. So the point is, technology is going to play a huge role. And then you have the other side of the coin, which this paper talks about, and I know Alan Kruger and Aaron Klein will talk about in the next panel, which is various newer technologies in terms of user fees. Ultimately, mobile devices as a technique of collecting user fees and a lot of other approaches. So yes, technology is going to play a huge role, but pose some enormous challenges. Because ultimately, we're going to have to replace the gasoline tax.
But technology can lead us to a vehicle miles travel tax that is relatively non-obtrusive. That technology exists today. We should do it. In the Northeast Corridor, it's estimated by 2030 that there'll be almost 40 million more cars on I-95. Can you imagine that? If you've ridden on I-95 now, can you imagine that?
Shut it down. You'll be gone.
Do you have any
Travel on
Do you have any
95.
optimism about some of these rapid speed rail systems? We're so far behind the rest of the world.
Oh my God.
Mr. Secretary, I guess they're doing one in Texas now, but is there any hope? I'm going one from Washington to Philadelphia. We could get that done in 20 minutes.
No, I have a lot of optimism about high-speed rail in this country.
Happening, or that it should happen?
No. Not blind optimism. Optimism that it's actually going to happen. California broke ground earlier this year. That project has several phases, but phase 1 is actually churning dirt right now. Texas is discussing a line between Houston and Dallas. There's also a discussion about a line that runs from Miami up to Orlando. And so I think you're going to start to see high-speed rail taking off between city pairs across the country, and eventually they will connect. But I think that has started. I think that we're also going to see over the next 20, 30 years more long-distance travel becoming more efficient by way of airplanes because of the advent of next gen, which will greatly enhance our ability. It'll actually reduce passenger delays by 48% according to our projections, which for those of you who travel by plane, is probably welcome news. And that kind of technology changes, I think those things are going to happen. We just have to, I think the problem we have right now is we have to have big things that we're shooting for. And right now it just feels like we're just trying to have the same money for the same mind-numbing commutes that we have every day, and they're getting worse.
Secretary, how are we going to finance the production of next gen?
Well, that's another challenge that we have.
It isn't a challenge. It isn't a challenge. There's something called a passenger facility charge. Now, it has to be used for airport improvement. It couldn't be used for next gen. Change the statute, put an additional $10 on the passenger facility charge, and bond off it. You could have next gen in place in America in 2 or 3 years. And it's absolutely doable. And do you think anybody would notice? The airlines charge us 25 cents for a bag, 35 cents for priority access. Dollars. I mean, think about it.
Billion here, billion
Think about it. Another $10 on the passenger facility charge again. Anybody know what the passenger facility charge is right now? The federal passenger facility?
You get 76ers tickets for that too?
Raise your hand if you know. Well, yeah.
Mr. Secretary,
Secretary,
is there,
go ahead,
Mr.
Rosa.
Secretary, is there in the transportation bill, help me refresh my memory here, are there serious dollars there for high-speed rail?
In our bill?
In the discussions about, from the congressional side? I'm saying that because last time I looked, we were looking at a transportation bill that did not have a serious high-speed rail component.
Yes.
You're talking about states and localities. How can we not do that? That is the place that we are in trying to think of what is the bold vision where we're going overall. If you're not doing high-speed rail, then you're not looking at long-term economic growth and sustainability. You just should, go back to the horse and buggy. I mean, it's really pretty incredible that we can't get a new way to do this with all the wonderful creative financing minds that we have in this country, and to move forward the way that the Asian Development Bank is doing, the way that the European Investment Bank has been doing for many years, ways in which we can finance infrastructure in not just small bore issues or potholes versus freeways, or looking at a way in which we can think big the way we have in the past.
Rosa, I never realized how much you idolize Europe until this discussion.
Well, listen, I would just say to you, it's not idolizing Europe.
Kidding.
You get on, I know you are, but you get on the train in London and you get to
won't say that in New
Paris
Haven.
in 3 hours. I take the train to New Haven every week, twice a week, from Washington to New Haven, and it goes on to Boston. One needs to do something about the roadbed. You get to Connecticut, you are crawling on this high-speed Acela train. We ought to be doing something to make sure that that is working.
Mr. Secretary, she's asked you.
So to the question of how we treat rail, we believe that instead of the so-called highway trust fund, you should have a surface trust fund. And so rather than pulling out rail should be part of the trust fund. And that would be a sea change, because typically our rail systems, our passenger rail systems, live in a hand-to-mouth existence every year with appropriations. And so organizations like Amtrak cannot plan long-term. They're just in the same position as state and local governments right now because of the funding uncertainty. Let me say one other thing about this, though, because it brings up another topic that's a little nerdy, but I think it's worth bringing up in a group like this, which is the governance challenges of our transportation system are massive, and I think Secretary Rubin was alluding to this earlier. Our rail systems, we have Amtrak as a passenger rail system. Our aviation system is basically run by the federal government. Our transit systems are basically local. Our highway systems are basically run by the states. And when you sort of look at the spaghetti bowl of governance, I think when you start talking about public-private partnerships or implementing big national ideas, that is an issue that has to be thought about and addressed, because we really do have a lot of chefs in the kitchen when it comes to our infrastructure. And I'm not judging it, I'm just saying that that is a challenge that we have in terms of doing some of the things we see other countries doing.
Roger Altman, we're going to turn this over, I think, to questions in just a moment. I'm going to duck out, but I'm leaving in the more than
Al Hunt is so serious about this subject that he has to leave early.
Tell them why you're leaving. It's your day job.
Yeah.
See you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
All right, we're going to turn to some questions that have been submitted by all of you, and I'm going to direct these to the panel for the next few minutes. And let me start with a provocative question here, which a member of the audience has submitted, which is, did we actually harm infrastructure funding, federal infrastructure funding, by eliminating earmarks? And even though there were good reasons at some levels to do that, bridge to nowhere and so forth, did it end up harming infrastructure funding, and should we consider reinstituting it? Rosa, I'll start with you.
I don't know if these, first of all, I'm someone who has supported earmarks, and I think that they play a very important role in being able to assist state and local governments and nonprofits, et cetera, in trying to deal with services and programs that otherwise would not be funded. I don't know if I would use the word, was it harm, but it is the success of our ability to fund infrastructure, transportation, or other infrastructure projects should not be based on a political quid pro quo. That's why I move in the direction that I do. I think so much of what we have done, and that's why you see a bridge to nowhere or so forth, and anything that can get challenged, which turned away from a system of earmarks, which has a place and it could do some good. But what happened is that the political process mired, this system has been so mired in a political process, whereas I pick up the phone, I know somebody, and they say, we need to do this, I'm running for re-election, and I need this help or that help. That gets caught up in it, and that was the wrong way to deal with it. And I think we needed to separate out, and we need to get away from a system that is grounded in the politics and political ideology, and we need to deal with what the issues are in the structure.
Governor, what would you say about that?
Well, I certainly agree in principle and theory with what Rosa said, but whenever I needed to get, whether it was a gas tax increase or other things, for gas tax increase, we had a map, and we called in legislators individually, and we said, Tom, here's what's going to happen in your district. 19 is going to get expanded 26 miles. Now, we're going to tell people in your district that if the bill is voted, it's going to expand 19, 26 miles. So we hope you'll have your vote. Earmarks, I have sympathy for President Obama, because earmarks were one way to persuade legislators to do things that they, in the first instance, shouldn't do. Is that the right thing? No, it's not the right thing. Is it the practical thing? Sure it is. And earmarks, another benefit of earmarks is we could do larger projects. You could never do the big dig. And the big dig, people up in Massachusetts will tell you that it's been worth its weight in gold. I don't know if the Secretary would agree with that, but we could never do the big dig without earmarks, because there's no funding pool that big to get the big dig done.
Secretary, you want to comment on this?
No, sir.
I didn't think so.
But the fact is the administration does have, the administration still does have earmarks.
All right, let me ask
Members don't.
let me ask a version of that question. It's a different type of way of thinking about it. With states and localities representing a higher and higher share of total infrastructure spending in the country, and I believe overall it's about 2/3 today of infrastructure spending being paid for and executed at the state and local level. Is there any merit in considering or in revising the federal role towards a block grant approach? And would that, in any respect, help break this logjam? I'll start with Secretary Foxx.
I don't know that it would break the logjam. But what I do think is that we need to really think about the system we need and not the system we had back in 1956. And what you're seeing happen in this country is that you're seeing a lot of leadership emerge at the local and regional level. But that leadership doesn't have a ready pipeline of resources to build transportation infrastructure. They're really dependent upon the states to make decisions to get that money down. And if you talk to mayors across the country, you're an interesting case, Governor, because you've been both a mayor and a governor. But many mayors would like to see more transportation dollars coming into the local level. So I think there is merit in looking at different delivery mechanisms for the funding we have, but I don't know that it solves our problem here in Washington.
Ed, do you have a view?
Well, people don't understand that federal funds the transportation funds are not controlled by the federal government. Even under the current, it goes to the states, and the decisions made as to which projects are funded in the states are made by what's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization or the Rural Planning Organization, in great part influenced by the state Secretary of DOT. So the feds don't have anything to do with that. So I'd be wary of block grants, because block grants or devolution is always code for the federal government giving us less money than they did before. Not a very subtle code.
Okay, next question. Are mayors and governors, and I'll start with you, Ed, mayors and governors doing as much as they should be to try to help break this logjam in Washington? After all, they're on the front line. They're spending most of the money that's being spent anyway.
I think so. I think the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National Governors Association has been very vocal about this. And I think it's an area where you get Republican mayors and Democrat mayors and Republican governors and Democrat governors delivering that message to their congressmen. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. There was just a letter sent out, Marcia helped me, by senators who were former governors endorsing, what was it? By governors who are now senators, Republicans and Democrats, endorsed doing a comprehensive highway bill with a letter to their colleagues. So I think the answer is yes, Roger.
That's true. I think you look at Chicago, Mayor Emanuel has talked about, he's talked about an infrastructure process, a bank, whatever it is. But I think because the federal government has actually become stuck. And, you know, it used to be, as I said, a bipartisan way. You could get the 5 or 6 year reauthorization of the bills, and you could move forward. Now we're down to these few months at a time. So I think that they have to be very creative in looking at how they're going to meet their needs, you know, to their.
All right, let me ask the Secretary this next question. We did have an infrastructure initiative through the stimulus bill in 09 and 10, the Recovery Act. And there's a lot of debate about how effective that portion of the Recovery Act was, meaning we all remember the term shovel-ready, and there's a lot of people who think, in Washington, who think that it turned out there weren't as many shovel-ready projects as people expected there to be. What is your point of view about the degree to which the Recovery Act and the infrastructure portion of that was effective? What can we learn from it?
Well, first of all, I think the Recovery Act was enormously successful when it came to infrastructure, for sure. a lot of projects are actually still ongoing and putting people to work today. Back in my home state of North Carolina, one project is the high-speed rail project between Charlotte and Raleigh that is still going to be in process till 2017. So it got a lot of good things done. I think one of the issues that it exposed, from my vantage point, was that we still have a 20th century mindset when it comes to how we invest. So for example, almost $1 billion of Recovery Act money came into North Carolina. And North Carolina, by virtue of state determination, has a formula by which that money moves around the state. And we had 20% of the population in my city, but we got about $20 million when that money bumped around into the area of Charlotte. And so that's not a federal design problem. That's actually the pipeline problem that as it sifted through the states. That's how it landed in my particular case. And that exposed to me that we still have some challenges with how our policies actually work at the state and local level in terms of meeting the needs we have.
Roger, actually, projects were shovel-ready, but what the president and others in Washington neglected to realize is we have to bid those by law. So shovel-ready doesn't mean you get the money and then people are working in a week. There's a bid process. Now, in Pennsylvania, we speeded up the bid process. We speeded up the response time to RFPs. We speeded up the review time for our Department of Transportation, and we moved fairly quickly. But the only problem with stimulus and infrastructure was there wasn't enough money. There was $70 billion for stimulus and $350 billion for a tax cut that was meant to attract Republican votes. And the last time I checked, we got no Republican votes in the House and 3 Republican votes in the Senate. A lot of people like Barbara Boxer and Jim Inhofe argued that the infrastructure money in stimulus should have been tripled. If it was, we would have produced more high-quality jobs.
There wasn't enough money in the infrastructure. A third of the economic recovery program were tax credits, which the public never knew anything about. Described to them what advantages there were, but the amount of money for infrastructure, essentially because we couldn't pass a bill that would have gone over $1 trillion. There was no way, though we heard from a number of economists, et cetera, that that's the direction that you should go in. Also, though, in the economic recovery program, if I'm right, you had the Build America Bonds program, which is a successful program,
right.
And it has not been reauthorized, so that in fact the infrastructure bill did.
You'll hear in a few minutes. This paper proposes to
deal with
reauthorize those.
pensions and other pieces as well as a financing tool.
I assume everyone knows what Building America's bonds were. Essentially, the federal government paid 35% of the debt service, relieved the states from 35% of the debt service, which allowed us all to do a whole lot more projects in the teeth of the recession than we would have done. It was very successful. In fact, in the last month of its existence, there was almost a stampede to get these programs financed.
The Edward program has been a successful one, though it's cut back only, I think, to $100 million. Tiger Grant program has been, I just look at my state of Connecticut, it's been unbelievably important, so forth. But when you take a look at what's happening, and I agree with the governor, when you start to talk about block grants, that means they're going to cut the money for state and local government. We all know that, but that's why we're moving backward instead of moving forward on investment.
This panel.
On investment.
This panel has lasted so long that you've moved to Connecticut since Bob introduced you. Anyway, we've run out of time. I want to thank you very much, Secretary Foxx, Governor Rendell, and Congresswoman DeLauro. Thank you very much.